The world's most advanced throttle controller system, Pedal Commander. We're going to take a deep dive into this today and see if it's all it's cracked up to be for the 11th gen Civic. This car happens to be a 6-speed manual sport hatchback, K20 up front. I got this during a Black Friday sale. This is not a paid review from Pedal Commander. Paid $250 for this. The main objective, seeing if this unit can make this car drive like an older Honda with a cable throttle body. Based on the research I've done, it seems like city mode is exactly what I'm looking for, being that it gives you a 1-to-1 ratio, they claim, for throttle pedal at the throttle body versus your input at the pedal. So this will not increase any kind of horsepower or change any mapping on the ECU, so keep that in mind. But I bought this with that fully in mind, as that is not my goal with this product here. My goal is to, as a daily driver, make it a little more fun and responsive, to act more like the older Hondas I'm used to driving. Not much to this thing. As we open it up here, got this little card up front. Grab your fingers here, pull it out. As you can see, wires are labeled PC72. There's a couple pieces in here with some Velcro to mount the module to the side of the plastics underneath where your feet are, and the footwell there, and like an alcohol wipe here to clean the surface before you do. Very straightforward, very simple here of how this goes in the car. You basically are just intercepting the throttle pedal and plugging it back into itself. This has a power button and a plus or minus button. It's also Bluetooth to your phone to the Pedal Commander app to change these settings with your phone while you're driving, so you can possibly mount this in a hidden location and never have to touch it again. Top of your throttle pedal, way up there. You can see the connector. I'm gonna undo this connector and intercept it basically. Pedal Commander is hooked up. Just a quick look. Up there you can see. Super easy install, less than 15 seconds really. So what I'm gonna do here is show you the throttle body response for when I push the pedal without Pedal Commander installed. Then I'm gonna install Pedal Commander and take the same video. You just saw there wasn't a huge noticeable difference in stabbing the throttle between all the modes and stock. However, I will say that's because I was sitting still, and the main things I wanted to talk about with this Pedal Commander mod and this 11th gen Civic Sport is the way the ECU alters the throttle pedal signal based on all the other sensors in the car. 4 major things that I want to take a close look at here. We all know that adding Pedal Commander will increase throttle response when accelerating. Number 1 is the rev hang you get when the car is sitting still, because the throttle body doesn't close right away, so the engine RPMs don't drop that quick, so that your RPMs don't allow you to stall out when releasing the clutch if you let off the gas pedal too quick when you're releasing the clutch. So that's kind of a dummy mode that prevents you from stalling the car and makes takeoffs a lot smoother, which isn't a bad thing, but just the weirdness of revving the car when you're stopped in neutral or with the clutch in is just very laggy and doesn't allow you to blip the throttle and play with the engine RPMs the way you'd think. Number 2 is the throttle response based on your pedal inputs when you're driving at speed and you push the clutch in and free rev the engine, versus when you have the car in neutral with the clutch out and free revving the engine. Take a look at these clips. Clutch in, clutch out. So you'll see in those clips the engine RPM responded much quicker and dropped much quicker when the clutch was in. Not that you're driving anywhere at speed with the clutch out in neutral, so that's not a huge issue, just thought I'd point it out. But number 3 is a huge one, is the level of vacuum maintained through the intake manifold is the same throughout the whole rev range. And what I mean by that is the higher RPM you're at, the ECU keeps the throttle body open a larger amount to keep the vacuum levels the same throughout your whole deceleration range, so that the car isn't jerky at all if you let off the throttle at a high RPM. But the main takeaway about talking about that is there's barely any engine braking when you downshift through the gears, which is a key to driving manual. Is sometimes you want to just row through the gears coming to a stoplight and have the engine brake the car before you tap the brakes. Number 4 is when you let off the gas while you're in gear. There is a good second between when you feel the throttle body close and you actually feel the axles load and the car starting to engine brake. Like I said, the engine braking is very little, so it's very hard to notice when you can feel it, but there's a long period of neutral zone there where the throttle body's not closing right away to decelerate the car. This is the app I will be using. Up top is throttle position. In the center is commanded actuator throttle A control. So that is most raw value I can get from the gas pedal. As you can see here, when we're at idle, our car is warmed up, it's at 1. But you'll notice when I'm driving that when I let off the gas, you'd think it would drop right back to 1 anytime I let off the throttle. However, that's not the case because the ECU is doing stuff with that signal after the fact and commanding the throttle body, which is shown up top at 12.55% open right now. It is commanding that after the fact based on if you're moving and a variety of different parameters, whether your clutch is in or clutch is out. Below, you'll see in the lower left is my RPM, and then the right is the PSI and the manifold. Keep in mind, the way this is shown, it's not shown negative right now because this value you're seeing right now is an absolute pressure. So if the engine was completely off and there was no vacuum applied, it would be around 14.7 PSI, which is atmospheric pressure. So we can determine at idle, our throttle position is around 12.5. But the first thing I wanted to talk about here is how the car kind of reacts when you rev it in neutral or with the clutch in taking off from a stop. So in neutral here, this is with the pedal commander off and using the OEM throttle. You can see that there's a lot of rev hang, and when I push the clutch in and go in first, it's pretty much the same, it's unchanged. Now we're in city mode, which is a 1-to-1 ratio. Let's see if that rev hang goes away. Clutch in and first. Feels almost completely unchanged in city mode. Let's go to sport. It's quicker to rev up, but it doesn't eliminate any of the weird ECU programmed rev hang for the throttle body closing, as you can see there. Sport Plus, which is the most aggressive mode. Yeah, I'm barely tapping the throttle and you can see how quickly this revs up. There's still the incredible lag when you let off the throttle. So as expected, I didn't expect it to reprogram the ECU or anything, but I just wanted to let you know, keep that in mind, that it's not going to fix that very strange behavior of all the rev hang when you let off the throttle in certain situations. Now, when you drive the car and accelerate through the car, I've said it in many previous POV videos, there's very little rev hang and the car feels great when you're accelerating. But the biggest problems are when you let off the throttle, if you try to blip the throttle to downshift, it's not very responsive. Sometimes, just about every time when I'm above 3 grand and I blip the throttle to downshift to the next gear, I don't blip it hard enough. I stab it to the floor and it's not enough. It doesn't rev the car enough for the next gear, so it kind of slips the clutch to go into the next gear. So the other thing I mentioned was how when you let off the throttle, the time it takes to feel the engine start engine braking is more than desired. So what I'll do here is just demonstrate that for you. Letting off. Back on the throttle. It's not an instantaneous switch that you feel the car start engine braking. There's a little bit of a neutral period where the throttle body is doing its own thing and the injector shut off. Turning it on to city mode now. If it's improved, it's very minimal. I'd say it's slightly better, but it's not a substantial improvement. I still don't feel much engine braking in the car, and this is the same thing in all the modes, so I'm not going to bother going through them because I've already tested it. But keep an eye on the throttle position as the engine RPM increases. And now when I let off the throttle, keep an eye on it. We're up at 18.4 And I'm dropping through the rev range right now. And 17, 16, you know, now we're almost at 15. The point I'm trying to make here is, one of my main complaints with this car, the fact that there's very little engine braking. So when you're using cruise control on the highway in 6th gear and you go down a hill, the throttle body doesn't close enough. It's, as you can see there, the throttle body's changing its angle, and it's open more if you're at a higher RPM and completely off the throttle, and it slowly closes as your engine RPMs drop. And the goal with that is to keep the vacuum level inside the intake manifold consistent, and the vacuum level is much less than you would get in a throttle cable driven older Honda, or even some older drive-by-wire throttle bodies on like the 8th gen Civics that weren't as intelligent and tied to the ECU as this one. So what I'm trying to say is the throttle pedal inputs you give here, Pedal Commander can only do so much. The ECU is still going to alter that signal to the throttle body and make its own decisions. For example, take a look here without Pedal Commander on. So the ECU is changing based on what it thinks you're trying to do. It's changing what it sends to the throttle body, which is, if you're a true driver and you like to have full control over the car, those are things you don't expect. So keep that in mind and know that Pedal Commander doesn't seem to have the authority to override the ECU to make those decisions. The engine braking doesn't change, and the ability to rev the car in different situations doesn't seem to change. It seems like the main change here with Pedal Commander is just the throttle response when accelerating, which isn't too bad from the factory as it is. It's not curing the behaviors that do truly annoy me with this car. City mode, let's do a pull. So upshifting through the gears in city mode, say, feels a little bit more natural, like you have that cable there, but in the end of the day, it's still not the same feeling. It's definitely more responsive, and when you downshift, it does help because the throttle response is a little more instantaneous, so you don't have that little bit of lag that doesn't blip the throttle enough to downshift to the next gear. Just getting on and off the throttle here, you definitely can notice a difference. Just for the heck of it, I put it into sport. These same inputs you'll see are getting the throttle percentage up to like 58 there. And now Sport Plus, which is their insane mode, you can see 59, 71 on the lower gauge there, the commanded throttle position. But in Sport Plus, I will say, it probably feels the most responsive, which is expected as far as downshifting. Like you have a cable throttle body there, even though right there it still was weird. So the ECU is definitely still intercepting that signal and telling it no and delaying the throttle body, even though you want it to be a little more responsive. And the second you let the clutch out with it in Sport Plus, the throttle body's super sensitive again. But if I clutch in and downshift here, it doesn't feel much different than city mode. So based on those sensors and what's going on, it's not an ultimate cure for the weird ECU behavior. I think if you want to eliminate those things, you're going to have to get K-Tuner or something similar and reflash the OEM ECU for the way it's programmed to control that throttle body. Pedal Commander is only going to do so much. So it's still a little bit of a letdown to me that with Pedal Commander, the engine braking is still very little in this car. As you can see, it's just, I really just want the throttle body to completely close at any situation that I let off the gas pedal and give me that engine braking I'm looking for. But you're not going to be able to change that unless you do remap the throttle curve on the ECU with a tune. feels slightly better accelerating with city mode on. So now it's back off. Definitely has a little bit less punch to it. Downshifting at about 47 miles an hour from 4th to 3rd. This is with the unit off. You see I stuttered there, and it kind of went back up to 3,200, slipped the clutch a little bit. Let's try it in city mode. Still, same thing. It's not like a fix-all for the weird behavior. Whether it's worth it or not, I'm gonna leave up to you guys. If you desire a little more throttle response when accelerating, this may be worth it to you if you don't want to dish out $450 for a K-tuner or the $650 V2 K-tuner. But once you do that, you have to spend $250 to $300 or more if you go to a shop, but I would recommend getting an e-tune. But you want a custom tune to your car. You don't want to just run one of their base maps indefinitely, because every engine and every climate you're in is a little bit different. So if all you desire is a little more throttle response and the other weird quirks of decelerating don't bother you already, it may be worth it to you. However, if you're like me and you were really looking for complete control over that throttle body linked to the pedal, and what I mean by that is when you're off the throttle, that throttle body is closed and doesn't do any weird games like it does with the factory tune. But as I've proved here, it does not change that behavior. It's still gonna have little engine braking. In my opinion, I'm not sure if it is quite worth it or not. I think that I'm gonna drive around with it quite a bit more. Maybe a week with city on, a week with city off, and see if I can stand the difference for at least accelerating. But so far, I'm not blown away with the fact that it doesn't help with the quirkiness of this car. When you're on the highway in 6th gear, you're still gonna have the car braking for you in cruise control when you go down slight hills, because you're gonna be picking up speed, which is not something I've ever had happen in a manual car before. There's always been enough vacuum level through the engine to where you let off the throttle when you go down a hill that the car won't just take off like it's a CVT or any other kind of automatic car. That was always the awesome part about driving manual, and even coming to a stoplight downshifting, you're saving your brakes and you're using the engine to slow yourself down. The reason it's done like this and it's tuned like this into the ECU is it's much more fuel efficient. The longer you can go without touching the throttle means more miles per gallon. When you let off the throttle, the fuel injectors shut off and you're using zero fuel, completely zero fuel, and it's infinity miles per gallon. It feels good. It doesn't feel bad upshifting. I guess I never really had too much of a complaint with the stock ECU when you upshift it, so it's not a huge change and a huge improvement to me. Turn it off, you can instantly feel the lag is back a little bit now. The question still remains if it's worth it to you to get a little more throttle response without voiding warranty, because you can uninstall this thing in 2 seconds. The ECU is not seeing any reflashes or alterations to the program, so you're definitely not voiding warranty and have to worry about unflashing the car or anything. You just unplug this device and the unmodified signal goes back to the ECU. I'm gonna wrap the video up here, guys. I hope this was helpful to you guys and straightforward to follow. If you have any questions, leave them below about anything I was talking about. Going into this, I really had a feeling it wouldn't fix anything past the ECU, because the ECU is changing. Even right now, you can see throttle position A is 5%, and I'm at 0 on the pedal. It should really read 1 or 0. If you're a true driver that does a lot of track driving, is used to older Hondas, and you want that one-to-one connection with the throttle body at all times, this isn't gonna give you that. City mode claims to be a complete one-to-one ratio, but that's really only for accelerating. When you let off the throttle, and depending on the situation you're in, the ECU is gonna take over and intercept that signal before it gets to the throttle body and do weird things with it and tone it down. Keep that all in mind. It may be worth it to you if all you're looking for is a little more throttle response, a little more playfulness, but you don't mind any of the other quirks that I mentioned about the car. I tried to make this a super unbiased review of Pedal Commander on the 11th gen Civic platform. I don't know how it behaves on the 1.5 turbo. This is only in relation to the 2-liter, but I imagine the tuning and the throttle bodies is very similar. So, as always guys, thanks for watching. Give the video a like, comment, and I'll see you in the next one.